The story or stories you are about to hear are to entertain. The writers of these stories may claim they are true, yet they may not be. That is up to you to decide. After all, this world is a strange one. Today I have some disturbing creature encounters, but I want to start off with a bit of a weird one. So I was looking at my submissions the other night when I saw that one of the most popular submissions as of late also happened to be one of the weirdest. Let me just ask you this. What would you do if you encountered two werewolves? Going at it, getting down to business in a way that would make Mulan proud. A couple of wolfies enjoying some Netflix and chill. Anyway, yeah, that would be disturbing in multiple ways. The only thing worse than that would probably be walking in on your parents. That being said, enjoy the first story titled, I Walked In on Two Werewolves Mating, from PoetikDom, followed by more normal, scary stories. Ugh, I already have chills. As I drove along the highway, I'd seemed to have taken a wrong turn. The old GPS my father had given me was basically flipping me off at this point, and my cell had about 4% battery. I pulled into a nearby rest stop so as to not get further lost. I needed to see where on earth I was. The sun was gently dipping behind the very dense forest just behind the building. I went inside to relieve myself, and thankfully there was actually a roll of toilet paper there. After my personal business concluded, I washed my hands and headed back to my car. I opened the door, and suddenly I heard noises coming from the forest. These noises were strange. Breathing, heavy breathing, very heavy breathing. I guess panting would be more accurate. The sound was quite familiar. I thought, wow, with a smirk. There's really someone out there getting it on. Right in the middle of the woods. I stood still for a minute to acclimate my eyes to the darkness. I creeped closer very slowly, but the closer I got, the more I thought, that doesn't sound like people. This panting was very guttural, primal. About 20 yards later, I began to make shapes out, forms. Then I backed up a few yards, swallowing hard, and wondering if this was a good idea. I pulled up my phone and unlocked it. I decided maybe I should find a night vision app. The best one I could find at the time was $9.99. That was expensive for an app. Oh well. I could have quite the story to tell and pictures to share if I could snap a photo of these weird animals going at it. Maybe they're bears or something. Might even be able to sell the photograph to some nature magazine, but maybe that's wishful thinking. I downloaded and opened the app. I pointed it at the forms I could see as stealthily as possible. I inched forward, and I could not believe my eyes. I was quite impressed with the app, first of all. It was quite a difference from my normal camera. I thought the app would just be a scam. I assumed that night vision was a thing that had to be built in the hardware, but whatever this software was doing, it was a really good job. But before me, there were two animals, but they were unlike any animals I'd ever seen. One of them was on all fours. It had dark, silvery gray fur, but seeing fur on a figure that had a feminine shape, it was quite bizarre, because I swear there were bumps signaling female anatomy. It was like the perfect blend of human and some furry mammal features that resembled a wolf. There were paws where hands and feet should have been, adorned with large claws, and behind the female stood a male, claws firmly gripping onto her haunches. This male was at least 7 feet tall and probably 450 pounds. It was rock-solid muscle, covered with a blacker than black fur. Then he howled or screamed some nightmarish sound, feral and textured, Before I could take pictures, I was so terrified from the sound that I ducked down. I began to crawl back to my vehicle, horrified that these things might see me. Some animals can be far more aggressive during mating. Halfway back to the vehicle, like an idiot, I stepped on a fallen branch. I quickly looked back at the two forms. They were now facing me, both in the same stance now, and I couldn't help but feel they were looking at me like a fat kid eyeing some whopper. I sprinted back to the car, opened the door, jumped in, and slammed the door shut. A second after I did that, a loud thud came from my roof. Both of them had jumped on it, and from both sides a head peeked in from the car windows. I slipped the key in and started the engine, flooring it out of there as quickly as I could. I did not stop until I reached the end of my road. To make sure I wasn't followed, I cracked my window and took a picture of the car roof first. Nothing was there. They hadn't latched on, and a picture of the surrounding area showed that I hadn't been followed either. That was a crazy night. Now on to the normal, serious stories. Tatzelwurm, from Eric M. I was born and raised in a small village in the southwest of Germany, on the banks of the river Moselle. It's a very nice and quiet place, with an ancient castle on the top of a hill towering over it. We have a local myth about a Tatzelwurm, and in the center of the village there is even a fountain in the shape of a Tatzelwurm, dedicated to it. A Tatzelwurm is a dragon-like creature, but without wings. It is said to spit poisonous breath. Now, my friend Kai and I were quite fascinated by this myth. There is a path a little outside of our village leading into a forest, and legend has it that this path was used in the past by this beast when it came to prey on livestock and peasants. The path is even named for it. On a moonlit night, Kai and I wandered that path. We brought cameras, flashlights, and each of us even carried a small pocket knife. Even though we knew if that beast really did exist, it would attack us, and everything we'd brought would be useless. A few hours into our investigation, there was still nothing to be found. We smiled at one another, figuring the legend really was just BS. All of a sudden, we heard a hiss behind us, and in shock we turned around, pointing our flashlights in the direction that the noise had come from. It came from the thick brush behind us, which was now rattling. The hissing grew louder, but we were frozen with fear, kept our lights pointed at the rattling bush. Then we saw it. A scaly creature. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like a Komodo dragon, but without its hind legs. But the front legs were still there, which bore sharp claws. The head was quite flat, and I guess in total its length was about 13 feet. The front legs were quite muscular, and it dragged its heavy body along the way with them. It began to come towards us, and we were too surprised and disturbed to react quickly. It didn't launch at us, but moved very slowly. Our instincts took over. What if we could prove the legend to be true? What if we were the ones to actually discover this species? We looked at each other, then each of us grabbed a big rock, forgetting we even had pocket knives, and began to bash the creature until it stopped moving entirely. "What now?" I asked. We knew there was no way we could carry the thing back to the village, and to be honest, we still weren't sure if it was dead, and we were too afraid to touch it. After all, our adrenaline had worn off. We decided to go get the police, or the fire brigade, some sort of authority. We'd call them and wait at the main road, as the path was too narrow for cars. So we called and waited. Then when they arrived, we shared our experience again of nearly being attacked by some animal, and in a hurry, we began to show them the way towards it. We arrived where we had been before, and we scoured the forest, trying to find the Tatzelwurm. But where it was supposed to be lying, it was gone. How could this be? I thought to myself. Kai and I looked at each other confused. The policeman, however, did not take too kindly to the whole situation, and threatened us that fake calling the police could be fined with up to 400 euros. They reminded us that there are real emergencies out there, and that we were taking time and attention away from the people who need it. We felt terrible. We knew then we should have calmed down and taken some pictures before we called the police. But we know what we saw that night. We know what we thought we attacked. And now I'm hoping that attacking it in the first place was not a good idea. Will-O-Wisps, from Annie. This is something that has been going on for a while now, over the span of a few years. I keep seeing these twinkling lights in the woods at night. They blink on and then twinkle past the window, drifting like feathers. This started back at around the summer of 2015. Back then, I used to be a lifeguard, so I would go and stay at my grandmother's house for the summer. My grandmother lives in a wooded area. For some context, the room I stay in has one window facing the side of the house, which has no trees, and the other window faces the woods and the tree line. The first time I saw the lights was when I was lying in bed. I thought that they were fireflies at first, except they're light blue, teal in color. They kind of just drift lazily by the outside windowsill. I didn't feel threatened or afraid. They didn't really give off any sort of presence. Not at first, because that summer I didn't really pay much mind, and I was still under the impression that they could just be fireflies. Well, the year 2015 came and went, and then I was back for the summer of 2016. Once again, I began noticing these lights. I would chalk it up once more to fireflies, but then I noticed that they always drift around in the same exact spots. Which, I'm no expert though, it's odd behavior for fireflies. I've always believed in the paranormal, but I was still very much convinced that these lights were natural, not something out of the ordinary. Soon it was July, and I realized something. I realized that the lights couldn't be fireflies, because I've seen them with fireflies and the color, as I mentioned before, is not the same. They also look more like Christmas tree lights or twinkling little stars. I also came to the realization that it couldn't possibly be fireflies because I only started seeing them during the summer of 2015, and fireflies have been around here longer than that. Well, August of 2016 rolls around soon, and I start seeing them inside the house too, dancing around the pictures on the walls in particular, usually along the frames, or near the mirror and the light fixture. These seem to be their 3 favorite spots. This further reaffirmed to me that fireflies are definitely out of the equation. This kind of thing continued through 2017, and I have since acquired more proof that it can't be fireflies or any sort of bug because it happened in the late autumn months of that year too. Despite them now being inside, I didn't think of them being evil or frightening. It's been 3 years, and they hadn't done anything bad. That said, they aren't good per se either. They just kind of exist. I just have no clue what they could be. I've shared this story with other people, and the most common term I hear for them is will-o-wisps. It's a theory that I'm fond of. Another one I hear is aliens or angels, but I don't know about that. The reason I'm sharing this now is because something happened that stood out and reminded me of these appearances. I went to visit my grandmother just this year for the holidays, and I saw them again. This time, it was a little different than before. After seeing them, I saw something else. I drifted off to sleep as usual, but woke up in the middle of the night there was a light of the same blue color that would flash every few seconds. At first, I thought it could have been a police car, but the flashing was very clearly coming from the woods, not by the roads. At the time, my brother was on the bottom bunk, but he slept through it. I'm not sure if this is related to the original teal twinkles, or if it's something else entirely, but it was quite interesting. This may not be the creepiest story, but it is a weird one. What are these blue, floating things? Why do they like our pictures? Thank you for giving me a chance to be heard. Attacked by a Wendigo, from Green Arrow M765. It was August of 2018. My family owns a piece of property up in the mountains of Wyoming. I won't say where it is located for the sake of privacy. It's right next to a national forest, though. My family has been going up to the property for as long as I could remember. We even finished building a small cabin right before this story took place. Now I've been hunting and been out in the forest with my dad and brothers for as long as I've been able to handle a rifle. I'm pretty comfortable in the woods, and while we have on occasion come across predators, such as mountain lions and bears, after this encounter, I may never feel safe in the woods again. In Wyoming, we get snow earlier in the year, especially in the mountains, so we have to winterize the cabin so that the pipes don't burst with the cold, and we put up wood covers over the windows, so if they somehow break, the cabin can still be sealed. Now, normally my dad and I go and do this, but this year he was working a lot, trying to make more money before the snow slowed him down till spring. My brothers were busy with their jobs too, so my dad asked me to winterize the cabin myself. I decided to make a weekend out of it, since it was probably the last time I'd be able to make it up there that year. That Friday, I packed my bags, and I took 2 of our dogs with me. One was an Australian Shepherd, and the other was a small poodle mix. The drive up was uneventful, but the closer I got to the cabin, I did notice that there was little to no wildlife, which is unusual for this time of year, especially as the sun was setting, and it was prime time for deer and other animals to be out and about. When me and the dogs finally got to the cabin, the sun was just slipping behind the horizon. Now, where the cabin sits is on top of a large hill that looks out over a long valley, and you can see the peaks of some mountains in the distance, as well as the national forest, which is about 1.5 miles to the south. It really is a breathtaking view. That night, however, everything just seemed a little off. I chalked it up to me being by myself up there. I grabbed my bags and went into the cabin. Later that night, probably around 2 a.m., I was awakened by the strangest sound I'd ever heard. Like the mix of a woman wailing and some kind of dog howling, mixed with a gurgling at the end. It was very loud. Now, my little poodle Mix is pretty much fearless. He has a bad case of little man syndrome and was growling, but my Australian Shepherd was whining in the corner of the room, which was not normal for her. She generally was very protective. The noise came and went for the next few hours, but eventually I fell back to sleep. The next morning when I woke up, I somehow convinced myself that it had been some kind of weird dream that I'd had. I was determined not to let it ruin the rest of my weekend, but even so, I grabbed my dad's shotgun that I'd brought, just in case. It's never a bad idea to be armed when there are predators out there in the first place. It may have been late in the year, but there was still a large population of rattlesnakes in the area. Now, at the bottom of the valley, there is a small creek that runs through our property, and it had rained a lot that year, so we actually had water, which is unusual in Wyoming. It was only the second time that I can remember being up here with some rain, so I was kind of excited to spend the day there. I packed up the four-wheeler and set off. One of the things that should have been a red flag, though, was that neither of the dogs wanted to go when they normally loved exploring those woods. I was young and dumb, so I didn't think much about it. When I made it to the creek, I spent the day chasing toads, dipping my feet in the water. When the sun began to set, I decided it was time to head home. On the way back to the four-wheeler, I noticed that there was a smell, like rotting flesh, coming from a patch of brush nearby. Of course, I decided to go check this out. What I saw was a large bull that looked like it had been torn to shreds. It seemed like maybe a bear must have done it. A bear was the only thing I thought could be big enough to do that. I don't know if you've ever seen a bull up close, but one that's full grown is huge, close to 1,000 pounds. And just thinking that there was some predator out here that could do that to a bull, I didn't want to know what it could do to me. I wanted to get out of there, to get back to the cabin as fast as possible. When I got back, I put the wood covers over the downstairs doors and windows just to be safe, and I turned off the lights outside. I ate a quick dinner and went to bed, just wishing that it was morning so I could leave, because between the bull and the screeching from last night, I knew that whatever was out there was not a natural predator. My grandpa, who was a full-blooded Cherokee, used to tell me stories of the creatures that roamed the woods, but I always chalked them up to him just trying to scare me. These days, I can't be sure. I nodded off at some point, only to be awakened by the sound of screeching, the same sound from the night before. It was much closer now. It was so loud that I thought my ears were going to start bleeding. Like the night before, the screeching would stop and start back up, steadily getting closer. I lay there in horror until one screech sounded like it was right outside. My God, I whispered to myself. To my horror, something whispered back, like an echo of my own words. My God. I was frozen to the bed. My smallest dog was growling for all he was worth, and that's when we heard the sound of metal being scratched at, slowly, deliberately. It was coming from over by the window. The way the basement is, the bedroom I was in was too high up for anything to get at. But then the glass in the window shattered, and this long, bony, ash-white arm with claws at the end reached in, followed by an identical arm, and then a head of what looked like a deer's skull, skin hanging off in strips, and then that familiar smell hit me, that one of rotting flesh. It was so bad and rancid it made my eyes burn. It was by far the worst smell I've ever smelled. It slowly pulled itself in through the window, revealing a long, skinny frame that was as skinny as the rest of it, with ribs poking against its skin. And when it was fully inside, it had to hunch itself over to fit in the room. It had to have been at least 8 feet tall, probably bigger. My God. It once again repeated what I had said. It was like it was mocking me. The lights in my room were on but dim, so I could still plainly see it. It was truly horrifying. The teeth on the deer were pointed more like a cat's. I looked down towards its chest and saw a second head, one that was like a person, with no nose. It was so sunk in you could see every bone it had. Its teeth were long and pointed, and where its mouth should have been was a black tongue that flicked in and out like it was tasting the air. It was approaching my bed. When it was almost at the foot of my bed, my little dog launched himself at the thing, biting at its legs. It had a look of utter confusion on its face when this happened, like it couldn't believe that it was being attacked by something so puny. It reached for my dog, but that's when I finally broke out of my stupor. I was not going to let it hurt my dog. While I sat there, I reached over and grabbed my shotgun. I was praying aloud too. My praying got this thing's attention. Its face twisted in pain or anger. I flipped off the safety, and I fired right at its chest. It barely moved, but I did see some of it tear through. It screeched again, With that, it turned and leapt out the window, vanishing into the night. I noticed my poor dog had been thrown toward the wall. He wasn't moving now, and I was terrified he was dead. I rushed over, and I saw that he was still breathing, but he would not get up. I noticed there were gashes across my chest as well, and my shirt was soaked in red. I reloaded the shotgun, picking up my poor dog, and I practically had to drag my other one from underneath the bed. We made a mad dash to my truck and drove out of there as fast as we could. I could still hear that thing screeching in the woods in those mountains. We left that place and raced toward town. I found a vet who looked at my poor dog. He had a few broken ribs and he broke his front leg, but he healed up just fine. When we were done there, I was taken to the hospital. I got some stitches, but I was going to be okay too. Ever since that night, I haven't been to the woods or back to our cabin, and I don't have any intention yet of going back. When I told my grandfather what happened, he said that he believed I was attacked by a Wendigo. And from what I've heard and researched, maybe he's right. All that I can say is never go to the mountains alone. Listen to your gut. Never go unarmed. And if you do encounter something, have a gun ready and pray. Those may be the only things that can save you. It Wanted Us to Follow, from Alvin J. Over the last summer, not long after I turned 16, my boyfriend was working the closing shift at our local subway. Most nights I'd go hang out with him for the last hour of his shift. We'd been doing this all summer. I'd walk over from my apartment a few blocks away, then we'd walk back together after his shift was over. We live in a small town in Colorado. Because of this, the subway is near a lot of pot shops, and we encounter a lot of high a-holes. Some of them are alright. Aside from the stoners, we also get a decent amount of hate from people. Most of our town is a bunch of conservative Christians. Nearly all of them are fine and keep to themselves, but there are the rare few that are homophobic jerks. For that, my boyfriend and I get a lot of crap for being openly in a gay relationship. Sometimes we even get racist people who need to make some negative comment about my boyfriend being black. But whatever we encountered that night, I would quickly take those awful people over it. On the night in question, my boyfriend was once again working alone. The place was never really busy during the last shift, especially not on a weeknight. My boyfriend and I, of course, didn't care. It just meant we could actually talk without having someone potentially listen in. Like always, we encountered a stoner or two and maybe one normal customer. Things were completely typical, and we only had to last another half hour before it was over. We were having a conversation about whatever show the two of us had been watching together at the time, over the last few weeks. Then my boyfriend stopped when he noticed that someone was standing inside next to the door. We never did hear the bell ring, but we brushed it off. He was wearing dark clothes with a hood that hid his face. He didn't look like the tall, slender monsters that you always hear about and see in horror films. He looked like a guy, slightly below average in height and a bit wider. I sat at one of the tables to drink a soda and let my boyfriend make the guy a sandwich. But the guy didn't move. He just stood there, staring. I couldn't tell if he was staring at me or my boyfriend, but he or it was definitely staring at one of us. Eventually, my boyfriend told him that he couldn't stay unless he ordered something. But that thing didn't move. It didn't react at all. I didn't know what I was up with him or what I thought was a person. There was no smell of alcohol or weed on him, so from what I could tell so far, he wasn't under the influence of anything, and he clearly wasn't here to cause trouble. Most people don't scare me. I typically scare them. I'm not big, but I'm not small. I'm 5'10" and I take care of myself. But I do have a very punk look, the kind of look that is taboo and sketchy in a small town like ours. Even if my own ability to repel people doesn't make me feel safe, my boyfriend still does. He's 6'2" and was very strong. Even knowing that both of us are bigger and are likely stronger than this thing, it still put me on edge. This thing just stood there until it was time to close. My boyfriend began cleaning everything, since the guy clearly wasn't going to order. Once my boyfriend had finished cleaning and putting things away, we got ready to leave. We told the thing it would have to leave, that the place was closing down. This time it reacted, raising its arm and pointing in the direction of the highway. Its skin was white, not pale but white, pure white with no other color, like a porcelain doll. I just stepped outside holding the door for my boyfriend, and that thing as it walked out. My boyfriend walked out first and it followed. I closed the door and let my boyfriend lock up. As soon as he was done, that thing made a gesture for us to come to it, then pointed once again to the highway. But I grabbed my boyfriend's hand and we began to walk the other direction. We didn't get more than a few feet away from where we were standing when each of us felt an unnaturally warm hand grab onto our wrists. That thing was holding on to us and began to pull us toward the road. This was when I saw its face. It looked like skin directly on top of its skull with no muscle or fat in between the two at all. Just literal skin and bones. Its skin was the same white color as its hands. Its eyes were just empty sockets, not like there was nothing there to begin with, but more like its eyes had been removed. The two of us tried to pull our arms away, but this thing was a lot stronger than we'd expected. Once we were halfway across the road, my boyfriend managed to break free from its grasp. I wasn't strong enough, though. It kept pulling me in the direction of the highway. I'm not ashamed to admit that at this point, I was in tears, terrified. My boyfriend pulled me away from it just as it reached the other side of the road, and we ran across the street together. We looked back to see if it followed us. It was now standing on the grass patch between the town road and the highway. It motioned for us to come and pointed once again to the highway. Without us making a move, that thing began walking towards the road. It stepped onto the highway right in front of a large truck, and when the truck passed over it, it was still walking across the highway. Many other cars seemingly passed right through it as it crossed, but it eventually made it to the other side and simply vanished. Once it was out of sight, I felt my boyfriend grab my hand way too tightly and began running back to my house. We rushed inside of my house and slammed the door. My mom was concerned to see us panicking and out of breath. We told her the story, which she didn't believe. Maybe we had just seen things, she said. Neither of us have seen that thing since, aside from possibly nightmares, and we still don't know what it was. I want to tell myself it was a bad dream, but we both experienced it. We both know it was real. All I know for sure is that I never want to see it again. Not in real life, not in my imagination. Never. Some very creepy critters and creatures crawl across our paths from time to time, so you'd better be ready to see the worst. Can you handle the weird, the terrifying? Can you handle two werewolves in the middle of Netflix and chill? I know I can't. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some nightmares to attend to. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. I would love to narrate it. If you want to support the show, check the links below. There's a link to my Patreon where you can donate and keep us afloat. And there's a link to my merch store where you can get some creepy clothes. Well, this episode is over, but don't you worry because more scary stories are on the way. So stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're great people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.